Red and blue lights tore through the darkness of a dusty county road, throwing sharp shadows across the pine trees and the loose gravel. A seasoned officer stepped out of his cruiser with one hand hovering over his holster, already convinced he was about to put another nobody in his place. He shouted commands, reached for his taser, and fired. When the man on the ground lifted his face from the gravel, a faint, unsettling smile touched the corner of his mouth. The officer had no idea that he had just chosen the worst possible person to abuse. Before the night was over, a call from Washington would place his badge, his freedom, and the future of his entire department in jeopardy. Supervisory Special Agent Adrian Whitmore was exhausted. It was the kind of exhaustion that settled into the bones after days of depositions, interviews, and legal briefings connected to a sprawling civil rights investigation in the Deep South. Adrian was a former Marine and one of the most respected investigators in the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Civil Rights Unit. His career had been shaped by rigid discipline, patient observation, and an ability to remain calm when everyone around him was losing control. He wore a charcoal suit, though his tie had been loosened and placed on the passenger seat. He was driving through Oak Haven County in a dark, unmarked Ford Taurus, returning to a regional field office after a delayed flight forced him to take the long way back. Oak Haven was the kind of county that resisted reform with quiet determination. For years, its sheriff's department and local police force had been surrounded by rumors. Complaints of excessive force disappeared without explanation. Internal reviews cleared officers before witnesses were fully interviewed. Black and Latino drivers were stopped far more often than anyone could justify. Cash and vehicles were seized from travelers who were never convicted of a crime. Adrian wasn't there to conduct an operation, at least not officially. He was simply passing through a jurisdiction his division had studied for months. A short distance behind him, hidden in the shadow of an abandoned gas station, sat Oak Haven Police Cruiser 42. Officer Wade Kincaid was behind the wheel. Kincaid was a longtime veteran of the department, a man whose reputation had been built on intimidation, shortcuts, and prejudice he rarely bothered to hide. Complaints followed him everywhere, but discipline never did. Beside him sat Officer Nolan Avery, a young rookie still carrying the uneasy idealism of someone who had entered law enforcement believing the badge meant service. Nolan was quickly learning that in Oak Haven, survival meant following Kincaid's rules. Kincaid's radar unit wasn't even switched on. He was simply watching the road. When Adrian's dark Taurus passed the abandoned station, maintaining the posted speed and holding a perfect position inside the lane, Kincaid narrowed his eyes. "Look at that," he muttered, shifting the cruiser into drive. Late model car, out-of-state plates, dark windows. "Did you see the driver?" Nolan glanced through the windshield. "I saw a man driving," he said carefully. "You saw a man who doesn't belong around here," Kincaid corrected, his voice sharpening. "Run the plate." Kincaid entered the number into the mobile computer. The response appeared after a brief delay. "Restricted. Registration data unavailable. Contact the National Crime Information Center for verification." A trained officer would have recognized the message as a likely indication of a protected government vehicle or an undercover federal asset. Kincaid saw only what his prejudice wanted him to see. "Stolen," he declared, a thin smile forming on his lips. "Or cloned plates. Probably running drugs through the corridor. People like this always think they're smarter than everyone else." "It says restricted, not stolen," Nolan pointed out quietly. "Maybe we should contact dispatch and verify it." "I am the one making the stop," Kincaid snapped. "Watch and learn." He activated the emergency lights. Red and blue strobes erupted across the highway, washing the trees in violent color. Then he pressed the accelerator and closed the distance. Ahead, Adrian saw the lights fill his mirrors. He checked his speed. Exactly the legal limit. He checked his position in the lane. Perfect. I understood immediately what was happening. He had spent years investigating officers who began stops with a conclusion already formed in their minds. Adrian didn't panic. He activated his turn signal, reduced his speed gradually, and guided the Taurus onto the wide gravel shoulder. He shifted into park, turned off the engine, and lowered all four windows so the officers could clearly see the interior. Then he turned on the dome light and placed both hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Every movement was deliberate. Every precaution was textbook. Inside the cruiser, Kincaid removed his seatbelt. "Watch how this is done, rookie," he said. "You establish control before they think they have options. Give them an inch, and they take a mile." He stepped out with an aggressive, swaggering gait. His right hand rested on the grip of his sidearm. Instead of approaching directly, he moved wide and raised his flashlight, aiming the beam into Adrian's side mirror so the reflection struck him in the eyes. Adrian squinted against the glare but kept his hand still. Kincaid stopped behind the door pillar, forcing Adrian to turn his head awkwardly if he wanted to look at him. "Keep your hands where I can see them, boy," Kincaid barked. The insult was deliberate. Adrian recognized it as a test, an attempt to provoke anger that could later be described as aggression. "My hands are on the wheel, officer," Adrian replied. His voice was deep, calm, and measured, the voice of a man who had negotiated during hostage crises and questioned violent criminals without raising his volume. "License and registration." "Move slowly," Kincaid demanded, directing the flashlight into Adrian's eyes. "The light is making it difficult to see," Adrian said. "My wallet is inside the left side of my jacket. The registration is in the glove compartment. How would you like me to proceed?" Kincaid scoffed. "I told you to get your license and registration. Don't play games with me. You know why I stopped you." "Actually, I don't," Adrian replied. "I was traveling at the posted speed and remained inside my lane. Please state the reason for the stop." Kincaid's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to calm questions. He was accustomed to fear. "You swerved and crossed the center line," he lied. "Your plates are also returning an irregular result. Now give me your identification before I remove you from this vehicle." Adrian knew the claim about the lane was false. He also knew exactly why the plates appeared as restricted. He could have ended the confrontation immediately by identifying himself as a federal agent. His credentials were inside his jacket. One sentence could have changed Kincaid's entire attitude. But as Adrian studied the officer's face, another thought came to him. The Civil Rights Unit had been trying to build a pattern or practice case against Oak Haven for a long time. The complaints were consistent, but the department dismissed the victims as unreliable. Dash camera recordings disappeared. Body cameras supposedly failed. Reports were rewritten until the officers appeared blameless. If Adrian displayed his badge now, Kincaid would apologize, invent a computer error, and release him. Then he would stop another driver who had no federal credentials and no one powerful waiting to answer the phone. Adrian made a calculated decision. He would let Kincaid reveal exactly who he was. "My wallet is inside my jacket," Adrian repeated. "I am moving my left hand slowly to retrieve it." He began moving with exaggerated care. "Freeze!" Kincaid shouted, pulling his weapon halfway from its holster. "Reach for anything else and I will treat it as a deadly threat." Inside the cruiser, Nolan watched with widening eyes. The driver was following every command. The confrontation was escalating for no legitimate reason. Adrian stopped instantly. "Officer, I am complying. You requested my license. It is inside my jacket, and I cannot retrieve it without moving my hand." "Step out of the vehicle," Kincaid ordered, his voice vibrating with manufactured anger. "Get out now. We are handling this outside." Adrian kept his gaze forward. "I am required to provide identification during a lawful stop. I am asking whether I am being detained or placed under arrest." Kincaid's face hardened. "You are being given a lawful order. Get out of the car." He reached through the open window, grabbed the exterior handle, and pulled the door open. Adrian did not resist. He released his seatbelt slowly and stepped onto the gravel shoulder. Standing upright, he was several inches taller than Kincaid, with the balanced build of someone shaped by military service and years of defensive training. The difference in size didn't make Kincaid more cautious. It made him feel challenged. "Turn around. Put your hands on the roof," he ordered. Adrian complied, placing both palms flat against the cool metal. "Officer, I strongly recommend that you request a supervisor at the scene." "I don't need a supervisor to deal with a smart mouth," Kincaid sneered. He kicked Adrian's feet farther apart, nearly knocking him off balance. Then he seized Adrian's left arm and twisted it sharply behind his back. "Are you detaining me?" Adrian asked, as pain moved through his shoulder. He committed every sensation and every word to memory. The false stop, the racial insult, the unnecessary force, the invented threat. Each detail belonged in a federal affidavit. "You're resisting," Kincaid shouted, speaking loudly for the cruiser microphone. I am not resisting, Adrian replied with equal clarity. My hands were on the vehicle. You twisted my arm without provocation. Kincaid released the arm and stepped backward. The calmness in Adrian's voice only made him angrier. His usual intimidation wasn't working, and he needed a stronger display of force to reclaim the control he believed he deserved. Taser, 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 he shouted. Nolan pushed open the passenger door. Wait. I isn't threatening you. The taser fired before Nolan could finish. 2 barbed probes struck Adrian in the back through the fabric of his suit jacket. A violent electrical charge surged through his nervous system. Every muscle locked at once. Pain flashed through him like liquid fire, and his legs stopped responding. Adrian collapsed onto the gravel with a heavy impact. Red and blue lights spun across his blurred vision. He had experienced a controlled taser exposure during training at Quantico, but preparation did not make the real pain any less severe. His body contracted through the electrical cycle. His teeth clenched. When the charge finally ended, he lay on the shoulder, gasping, his muscles twitching involuntarily. Kincaid stood over him with a triumphant smile. Not so talkative now, are you, tough guy? Nolan ran closer, horrified. I was just standing there, Wade. I was preparing to attack me, Kincaid replied without hesitation. You saw him tense. You saw him move toward me. Nolan looked at Adrian on the ground, then at the veteran officer who controlled his training evaluations and his future in the department. Oak Haven's culture demanded loyalty before truth. Nolan swallowed and nodded weakly. I saw it, he whispered. Kincaid rolled Adrian onto his stomach and forced his wrists together behind his back. He tightened the handcuffs until the metal teeth bit deeply into the skin. Adrian took a controlled breath. He didn't curse or beg. He turned his head until his cheek rested against the rough gravel and looked directly into Kincaid's eyes. You have just made the most serious mistake of your life, he said quietly. Kincaid laughed and pulled him upright by the handcuff chain, sending a sharp jolt through Adrian's shoulders. I hear that every week, he said. You're going to a county cell, and your expensive car is going to the impound lot. As they marched him toward the cruiser, a faint smile crossed Adrian's face. Kincaid believed he had caught another powerless driver. He didn't understand that the encounter had just delivered the evidence federal investigators had been seeking, and the trap was already closing. The ride to the Oak Haven precinct was nearly silent, except for Kincaid's smug whistling from the driver's seat and the tires humming over the pavement. Adrian sat inside the hard plastic shell of the rear compartment. His wrists throbbed beneath the handcuffs, and the taser probes remained embedded in his back. I used the drive to organize the facts. Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under color of law, unreasonable seizure, excessive force, false arrest, falsification of an official account, possible conspiracy. Kincaid was collecting federal charges with every mile. The cruiser entered the secured vehicle bay of the old brick building that served as Oak Haven Police headquarters. Kincaid opened the rear door and pulled Adrian out by the upper arm. Then he marched him through the double doors and into the booking area as if displaying a trophy. The precinct was quiet. Several officers sat at their desks, typing reports and drinking stale coffee. At the raised wooden booking counter sat Sergeant Everett Sloan, a veteran officer whose retirement was close enough for him to count the remaining paychecks. Sloan had survived by avoiding difficult questions. He knew which officers caused trouble, which reports sounded false, and which supervisors preferred ignorance. As long as the paperwork looked complete, he rarely examined what stood behind it. Look what I brought in, Kincaid announced, pushing Adrian toward a holding bench. Failure to maintain a lane, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. Sloan adjusted his reading glasses and looked over the desk. Most people Kincaid brought in were intoxicated, frightened, furious, or loudly defensive. Adrian was none of those things. Dirt marked his expensive suit, metal cuffs held his hands behind him, and taser wires hung from his jacket. Still, he sat with the straight posture of a military officer and studied the room with cold, analytical attention. Assaulting an officer? Sloan asked, raising one eyebrow. He doesn't look as though he fought very hard. He tried to take my head off, Kincaid claimed. I had to deploy the taser. Sloan sighed, already thinking about the paperwork. Empty his pockets. get his identification, and start the booking process. Kincaid approached Adrian and conducted another rough search. He removed an encrypted government phone, a set of keys, and a sleek black leather credential case from the inside of Adrian's jacket. He didn't open the case. He tossed everything onto the booking counter. The phone is locked. He refused to identify himself. Let him sit in a holding cell until he feels more cooperative. Sloan picked up the leather case. It was heavier than an ordinary wallet. He opened it. For a moment, the Oak Haven precinct seemed to stop breathing. A heavy gold shield rested beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Beside it was an identification card bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Supervisory Special Agent Adrian Whitmore, Top Secret Sensitive Compartmented Information Clearance. The color drained from Sloan's face. His stomach tightened so sharply that he had to grip the edge of the counter. He stared at the credentials, then slowly looked toward the man sitting on the bench. Adrian was already watching him. "Kincaid," Sloan said, but the name came out as little more than a whisper. "Yeah, Everett. Put him in the cell with the broken toilet," Kincaid replied, turning away with a laugh. "Kincaid, come here, right now." The fear in Sloan's voice made the officer turn around. "What's the problem?" Sloan rotated the open credential case so Kincaid could see it. Kincaid looked at the shield. Then he read the identification card. His mind rejected the meaning. "That's fake," he said. "It has to be fake. He bought it online to impersonate an officer." "It is not fake," Sloan whispered angrily. "Look at the security seal. Look at the embedded chip. You tased a supervisory special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Near the entrance, Nolan felt his knees weaken. He placed one hand against the wall to remain standing. Kincaid's expression changed completely. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a wave of dread so strong that his face seemed to collapse. He looked at Adrian again. The man he had stopped was not simply a federal employee. He was a senior investigator in the nation's leading law enforcement agency. Kincaid had unlawfully detained him, assaulted him with a taser, placed him in punitive restraints, transported him against his will, and created false charges to justify it. "Uncuff him," Sloan ordered. "Take those cuffs off immediately." Kincaid rushed toward the bench. His hands shook so badly that the key scraped repeatedly against the handcuff before entering the lock. "Sir, Agent Whitmore." "I didn't know," he stammered. "You never said anything. If you had told me who you were, none of this would have happened." The cuffs opened. Adrian slowly brought his arms forward and rubbed the deep red marks around his wrists. Then he rose to his full height, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked toward the booking counter with the taser wires still hanging from his back. He didn't respond to Kincaid. He retrieved his credentials and his phone, entered a long security code, and opened the encrypted device. No one in the precinct moved. "Agent Whitmore," Sloan began, sweat gathering along his forehead. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. Officer Kincaid acted outside our standard procedure. We can handle the matter internally and correct the report before it goes any further." Adrian lifted his eyes. "Sergeant Sloan, do you know who Deputy Director Preston Vale is?" Sloan swallowed. Every experienced law enforcement officer knew the name. Preston Vale supervised major domestic operations for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and answered directly to the Bureau's director. "Yes, sir. Hi is a busy man," Adrian said, raising the phone to his ear. "But he answers when the person leading his civil rights task force calls him." Kincaid backed toward the wall. His legs gave way, and he lowered himself to the floor with his head in his hands. Adrian waited as the secure line rang. "Sergeant, lock the front doors," he said. "This building is now a potential federal crime scene." The call connected. "Vale," a low, gravelly voice answered. "Preston, it's Adrian." The voice on the other end changed immediately. "Give me your status. I am physically secure inside the booking area of the Oak Haven Police Department. I was stopped without probable cause, ordered from my vehicle, subjected to unnecessary force, shot in the back with an Axon taser, placed in punitive handcuffs, and transported here on fabricated charges." A heavy silence followed. "Are you seriously injured?" "I remain functional. 2 probes are still embedded in my back. My vehicle is on the shoulder near Highway 9 and must remain untouched." The primary officer is Wade Kincaid, badge number 417. His partner is Nolan Avery, The patrol recording should contain Kincaid's false claim that I resisted. Adrian looked across the room. The conduct supports violations of Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242, and the federal statute governing assaults against federal officers. I am declaring the precinct a compromised crime scene. I need an evidence response team, agents from the Office of Professional Responsibility, federal medical personnel, and a tactical unit to secure the building. Consider it authorized, Vale replied. I am contacting the regional field office and the United States Attorney. No one touches the computers, records, patrol vehicles, or your car. Understood. Do not let them remove or alter anything, Vale added. If anyone attempts to destroy evidence, document it and keep yourself safe. Adrian ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. The night shift officers who had emerged from the break room stood frozen, staring at the wires hanging from his jacket. Someone call paramedics, Sloan said, reaching for the radio. We need to remove those probes. No, Adrian replied. The single word cut it through the room. Do not touch the probes. Do not touch my jacket. Both are federal evidence. I will wait for Bureau medical personnel. Agent Whitmore, you're bleeding, Sloan said. At least allow us to clean the wounds. Your only responsibility now is to contact your chief, Adrian interrupted. Tell him to come here immediately. Tell him to bring legal counsel. Then move away from every computer and evidence cabinet in this building. Sloan nodded quickly. The precinct settled into a suffocating silence. Nolan sat in a corner with his head lowered and his hands clasped together. Tears collected in his eyes. He had joined the department because he wanted to help people. Instead, he had watched his training officer assault a compliant man, then supported a lie because he was afraid. Kincaid remained against the wall, breathing too quickly. Adrian sat carefully in a hard plastic chair so the taser probes would not move deeper into his back. Pain pulsed through his muscles, but his attention stayed on the officers, the computers, and the doors. Eventually, the front entrance opened and Chief Silas Whitcomb hurried inside. Whitcomb was a heavy-set man who had thrown a trench coat over sleep clothes. His hair was disordered, his face flushed, and his expression carried the anger of someone who had been awakened by a crisis he believed should have remained hidden. What is happening in my building? He demanded. His eyes moved from Kincaid on the floor, to Sloan behind the desk, and finally to Adrian sitting beneath the fluorescent lights with taser wires trailing from his back. Chief, Sloan said, his voice unsteady. This is Supervisory Special Agent Adrian Whitmore of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Whitcomb stopped. His gaze shifted to the gold shield on the counter. Officer Kincaid stopped him on Highway 9, Sloan continued. He used the taser and brought him here on charges that appear to be unsupported. Whitcomb slowly turned toward Kincaid. You unbelievable fool, he whispered. Do you understand what you have done to this department? Then the chief faced Adrian and forced a nervous smile onto his face. Agent Whitmore, I cannot apologize enough. This was one rogue officer acting outside our policies. I will suspend him immediately. We can terminate his employment and refer any appropriate charges through local channels. You have my word as chief. Adrian looked at him with quiet contempt. Chief Whitcomb, your department received 37 excessive force complaints in recent years. 29 involved minority drivers stopped along Highway 9. Your Internal Affairs Division cleared every officer in every case. Whitcomb's smile faded. This is not a rogue officer, Adrian continued. It is a pattern. Those numbers require context, Whitcomb said. Complaints do not prove misconduct. Those numbers are already being reviewed by senior officials at the Department of Justice, Adrian replied. A deep vibration moved through the floor before Whitcomb could answer. Powerful engines approached the building. White headlights swept across the frosted entrance glass, and shadows crossed the booking room. Federal vehicles entered the parking lot in a coordinated line. The front doors opened, and a group of agents moved into the lobby. Leading them was Special Agent in Charge Gideon Cross, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a face set in hard concentration. Behind him came evidence response specialists in dark blue windbreakers. Heavily equipped members of the Regional Special Weapons and Tactics Unit entered at both sides, their yellow Federal Bureau of Investigation markings bright beneath the precinct lights. Secure the building, Cross ordered. No one touches a telephone, a computer, a camera system, or an evidence locker without federal authorization. Agents moved with disciplined speed. Two took control of the booking counter and directed Sloan away from the terminals. Others entered the hallways, blocking access to the records room, the technology closet, and the rear exit. "You cannot simply enter my department and take control," Whitcomb protested. "I am the chief of police. You need a warrant." Cross walked toward him and stopped inches away. "Chief Silas Whitcomb, I am Special Agent in Charge, Gideon Cross. A federal magistrate has signed a search and seizure warrant covering this facility, its digital systems, its records, its evidence areas, and all vehicles associated with tonight's incident. The warrant concerns organized civil rights violations and the assault of a federal officer." I held Whitcomb's gaze. "If you interfere with these agents, you will leave your own building in handcuffs. Do you understand?" Whitcomb's authority disappeared from his posture. "Yes, sir," he said. Cross turned toward Adrian. The hardness in his expression softened slightly. "Adrian, how are you doing?" "I've had better drives home," Adrian replied. Cross motioned to the federal medical team. "Take care of him. Preserve every probe, wire, and damaged section of clothing as evidence." Two trained medical specialists approached with a kit. They photographed the entry points, cut the wires, and carefully removed the barbed probes from Adrian's back. Each movement sent a sharp wave of pain through him, but he remained still. Cross looked toward Kincaid. "Is that the officer who fired the taser?" "That's him," Adrian confirmed. "Bring him up," Cross ordered. Two tactical agents lifted Kincaid from the floor. They removed his duty belt, firearm, ammunition, radio, taser, and badge. Each item was photographed and placed into a federal evidence container. "Wade Kincaid," Cross said, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in federal court." Kincaid said nothing. The arrogance that had defined him on the highway had vanished, leaving a frightened man who could no longer hide behind his uniform. "Where is the partner?" Adrian asked. On agent pointed toward Nolan. "Separate them," Adrian said. "Place Kincaid in the first interview room and Avery in the second. Secure the patrol camera, the body cameras, the dispatch logs, and the vehicle tracking data. No one from this department is to approach the evidence." "We're taking everything necessary to preserve the truth," Cross replied. "The Department of Justice will review this place from the records room to the server cabinet." Chief Whitcomb watched agents remove computer drives and seal filing cabinets. Years of ignored complaints and carefully managed silence were beginning to unravel in front of him. "Agent Whitmore," he said desperately, "I swear I did not understand the full extent of what Kincaid was doing." Adrian rose from the chair after the medical team finished dressing the wounds. "You understood enough, Chief," he said quietly. "You knew Kincaid targeted out-of-state drivers. You knew he used trafficking allegations to seize cash and property. You looked away because civil asset forfeiture funded this department." Whitcomb could not meet his eyes. "You built part of your budget on the losses of people who were never convicted of a crime," Adrian continued. "You rewarded the behavior that brought in money and buried the complaints that threatened it." He pointed toward the holding bench. "Sit down, Chief. Do not speak to me again unless federal counsel is present." Whitcomb obeyed. Oak Haven no longer belonged to the people who had controlled it through fear and silence. The evidence was in federal hands now, and the investigation had only begun. Federal agents gathered the local officers inside the break room under guard, while the evidence response team took control of the precinct. Adrian's Taurus was recovered from the roadside under federal escort and brought to a secure area without anyone from Oak Haven touching the interior. An agent retrieved a fresh shirt and tie from Adrian's travel bag. He changed out of the damaged clothing after the medical team sealed it as evidence. The muscles in his back still ached from the electrical charge, and the skin around his wrists remained swollen, but his focus had sharpened. He adjusted his collar and walked down the cinderblock hallway toward the interview rooms. Wade Kincaid sat in the first room, restrained at the metal table he had used to frighten countless suspects. For years, he had entered that room with a badge, a weapon, and the confidence that his version of events would always carry more weight than the person sitting across from him. Now his badge was inside an evidence bag, his weapon was gone, and federal handcuffs connected his wrists to the steel ring on the table. Adrian entered with Cross behind him. Cross remained near the wall while Adrian sat opposite Kincaid and placed a thick manila folder on the table. No one spoke. The silence stretched until Kincaid could no longer tolerate it. "Look, I made a bad judgment," he said, his voice rough. "It was dark. You were acting suspicious. My adrenaline took over. I misunderstood the movement toward your jacket." Adrian watched him without expression. Kincaid leaned forward as far as the restraints allowed. "I'm a police officer. You're a federal agent. We are on the same side. You know how unpredictable traffic stops can become." "We are not on the same side," Adrian replied. "I enforce the law. You use it as cover." Kincaid's face tightened. "I have a family," he said. "If you charge me with a federal felony, I lose my pension. I go to prison. Former officers don't do well inside. You're going to destroy my life over one stop." "It wasn't one traffic stop," Adrian said. "It was an armed detention carried out under color of law. It was also not an isolated mistake. It was your normal method." Kincaid wiped his nose against his shoulder. "You cannot prove that. You have tonight. And maybe I take responsibility for using too much force. But you cannot prove all the stories from people I arrested. It is my word against theirs." Adrian folded his hands on the table. "Do you truly believe I was simply driving through Oak Haven by coincidence?" Kincaid frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I supervise a federal civil rights task force with nationwide jurisdiction," Adrian said. "My unit has investigators, analysts, attorneys, and technical specialists working across several states. Do you believe I accidentally appeared on the exact section of Highway 9 where you prefer to conduct unverified stops, driving a vehicle with protected federal plates, while you were working the night shift?" Color slowly left Kincaid's face. "No," he whispered. Adrian opened the folder. "Several months ago, my office received an encrypted report describing a systematic pattern of racial profiling, illegal property seizures, fabricated narcotics claims, and excessive force inside Oak Haven County. The report identified you by name." He removed printed messages, dispatch records, complaint summaries, and financial documents. "We investigated quietly. You were careful enough to make the evidence disappear whenever an encounter became violent. Patrol videos were corrupted. Body cameras lost power. Narcotics appeared in vehicles after the drivers denied owning them. Internal reviews treated every victim as unreliable." Cross spoke from the wall. "Agent Whitmore agreed to drive the route in a controlled federal vehicle because we needed to observe whether Kincaid would act without being encouraged." Kincaid stared from Cross to Adrian. "You set me up." "No," Adrian replied sharply. "I followed every traffic law. I drove at the posted speed. I stayed in my lane. I complied with your instructions. I never asked you to stop me, threaten me, twist my arm, or fire a taser into my back." He leaned closer. "You made each of those decisions yourself." "That's entrapment," Kincaid said, his voice cracking. "A judge will throw the case out. Entrapment requires the government to pressure a person into committing a crime they were not already willing to commit," Adrian explained. "No one pressured you. You saw an out-of-state vehicle with protected plates. You saw a black driver, and your own habits did the rest." Kincaid lowered his head. Adrian studied him for a moment. "There is another fact you deserve to know," he said. "The encrypted report did not come from a civilian." Kincaid slowly lifted his eyes. "Who sent it?" Adrian looked towards the one-way mirror. "Our cyber team traced the original source to equipment associated with your own patrol vehicle." Kincaid froze. His gaze moved toward the door, then toward the mirrored glass. "Nolan," he whispered. "Officer Nolan Avery couldn't accept what you were teaching him," Adrian said. "He knew reporting you to Chief Whitcomb would end his career, and he believed it might place him in danger. So he contacted the federal government." Kincaid's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Nolan provided dates, locations, radio phrases, and descriptions of the searches. He explained how you chose vehicles. He told us you preferred the abandoned gas station because the area had poor lighting and few witnesses. He described the kind of driver most likely to attract your attention. Adrian leaned forward. "You thought you were teaching a rookie to become like you. Instead, you spent months riding beside a federal informant." Kincaid surged against the restraints. The chain struck the metal table, and the entire frame shook. He shouted Nolan's name, cursed him, and pulled harder, but the steel held. Adrian didn't react. He rose, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the door. "Let him calm down," he told Cross. They stepped into the hallway, and the heavy door closed behind them. Nolan sat on a folding chair outside the second interview room. He stood immediately when Adrian approached. "Agent Whitmore, I am sorry," he said. "I tried to stop him from using the taser. I should have done more." Adrian looked at the young officer. He saw fear, exhaustion, and genuine remorse. He also saw the heavy burden carried by someone who had crossed the unwritten code of silence to expose his own department. "I know you tried, Nolan," Adrian said. "I also know what you risked when you contacted us." Nolan lowered his eyes. "When Kincaid asked whether I saw you attack him, I agreed. I lied. I was afraid." "That lie matters," Adrian said. "Courage doesn't erase responsibility, and cooperation doesn't make every choice disappear. You will have to tell the complete truth and accept whatever consequences follow." Nolan nodded. "I understand, but your decision to report the pattern may have protected many people," Adrian continued. "You did something difficult when the easier choice was to remain silent. The Bureau will remember that as well." Adrian extended his hand. Nolan shook it, relief and shame moving across his face at the same time. Inside the precinct, the investigation expanded. Federal technicians copied every dispatch record and recovered deleted files from the secondary server. They compared patrol locations with complaints, property seizures, and missing body camera footage. The first results confirmed what Nolan had reported. Kincaid and several senior officers had been maintaining a hidden ledger. Cash taken from out-of-state drivers was recorded outside the official evidence system, then moved into a private account described as an operations fund. Chief Whitcomb was the only authorized signatory. The scheme was simple. Officers stopped drivers who appeared unlikely to challenge them successfully. They claimed to smell narcotics, searched vehicles, and seized cash under civil asset forfeiture rules. Some drivers were released without charges but never recovered their property. Others faced allegations built on planted evidence or incomplete reports. The department used part of the money for equipment and discretionary spending. The rest disappeared into payments that investigators would have to trace. Cross approached Adrian near the rear entrance and handed him a federal tablet. "We have the secondary ledger," he said. Nolan's description was accurate. Kincaid and several others recorded seizures that never appeared in the official system. Whitcomb approved transfers from the private account. Adrian scrolled through the recovered files. "This wasn't poor supervision," he said. "It was organized theft using police authority." "Exactly," Cross replied. "The United States Attorney is preparing charges. Washington is also placing the Civil Rights Division in direct control of the broader case." Adrian looked through the glass toward Chief Whitcomb, who was now seated alone in the second interview room. "Has he requested counsel?" A private defense attorney answered the call, reviewed the warrant, and advised him to cooperate. "Whitcomb is already asking whether testimony against Kincaid and the other officers will reduce his exposure." Adrian shook his head. The loyalty, holding the department together, had lasted only until everyone understood that federal prison was possible. "Protect Nolan's identity as long as the law allows," Adrian said. "He is the central witness." Cross nodded. "Senior leadership has approved protective measures. His future in local law enforcement is probably over, but his cooperation will be evaluated once the case is complete." Adrian walked toward a window near the front of the building. Beyond the glass, federal vehicles filled the parking lot. Evidence specialists moved boxes into secure vans while tactical agents guarded the doors. The Oak Haven Police Department had spent years making residents feel powerless. Now every record, every computer, and every patrol car connected to the scheme sat under federal control. Adrian felt no pleasure in seeing the building occupied. The raid couldn't restore the money, time, dignity, or trust taken from the people Kincaid had harmed. It was only the beginning of accountability. Still, beginnings mattered. Outside the precinct, reporters began gathering beyond the federal perimeter. News of the operation had spread through the county. Residents stood near the tape, some angry, some stunned, and some quietly hopeful. Federal agents led Kincaid through a rear corridor to a transport vehicle. His uniform had been replaced with plain detention clothing. Restraints secured his wrists and ankles for the transfer. As he approached the vehicle, he looked through the open bay and saw the people gathering beyond the barricades. Some recognized him. A few held old complaint documents. Others simply watched in silence. For the first time in his career, Kincaid experienced powerlessness without the ability to turn it against someone else. How was no longer the officer deciding whose story mattered. How was the accused, and the evidence would speak for itself. Adrian stood beneath the harsh work lights wearing a Navy Federal Bureau of Investigation windbreaker over his clean shirt. A paper cup of bitter Precinct coffee warmed his hand. The wounds in his back had been dressed, but every movement reminded him of the electrical charge. Cross joined him. "The financial team found more than the hidden account," he said. They recovered internal messages discussing monthly seizure goals. Whitcomb praised officers who brought in the most cash and criticized those who returned from the highway empty-handed. Adrian looked towards the building. "A quota for property taken from citizens." "They avoided calling it a quota," Cross said. "But that is exactly what it was. The Department of Justice will need to contact every identifiable victim," Adrian replied. "Property must be returned where possible. Wrongful cases must be reviewed. Anyone imprisoned because of fabricated evidence deserves immediate legal attention. The civil rights attorneys are already forming a review team," Cross said. "This will take years to repair." Adrian took a slow drink of coffee. "Then we start now." The evidence teams continued working as darkness began to soften beyond the trees. Oak Haven's corruption had not been created in a single night, and it would not be repaired in one operation. But the silence protecting it had been broken. That was something no internal report could quietly reverse. Adrian returned to Washington aboard a federal aircraft after the first phase of the operation was complete. As the plane rose above the clouds, he finally allowed his eyes to close. The pain in his back remained sharp, but the heavier burden was beginning to lift. For months he had studied the complaints from Oak Haven. Each file represented a person whose word had been dismissed, a family that lost money, or a life damaged by charges that should never have existed. Those cases had once appeared as names, dates, and allegations inside federal records. After the stop on Highway 9, Adrian understood their fear in a more immediate way. He had felt Kincaid's hand twist his arm. He had heard a lawful question transformed into supposed resistance. He had watched another officer choose silence while knowing the truth. The federal investigation moved beyond Kincaid quickly. Analysts traced money from the hidden ledger into department purchases, political accounts, and private expenses. Investigators recovered deleted messages showing that Chief Whitcomb knew exactly how officers were selecting drivers. Supervisors discussed which travelers were least likely to return for court hearings. They encouraged officers to describe large amounts of cash as possible drug proceeds, even when no drugs were found. Federal attorneys reviewed years of arrests and discovered repeated language across supposedly unrelated reports. Drivers were described as nervous. Officers claimed to smell marijuana. Vehicles allegedly drifted inside lanes. Body cameras failed at convenient moments. The similarities were too precise to be coincidence. Some people had lost their savings while moving between states. A small business owner lost money intended for payroll. A mother traveling to help her daughter was accused of transporting criminal proceeds because she carried cash for emergency expenses. Several young men accepted plea agreements because they believed no jury would trust them over the officers. Each case deepened the harm. The Department of Justice created a team to identify victims, review convictions, and recover property. Independent monitors were assigned to examine Oak Haven's policies, training, complaint process, and use of civil asset forfeiture. The town's leaders could no longer treat reform as an optional public relations exercise. Chief Whitcomb chose cooperation when the evidence against him became overwhelming. Through his attorney, he offered testimony about the hidden fund, the unofficial seizure targets, and Kincaid's role as the most aggressive officer on the highway. His decision wasn't motivated by courage. It was an attempt to reduce his own punishment. Still, the information helped prosecutors understand how the scheme operated. Kincaid refused to accept responsibility. He claimed Adrian had provoked the encounter. He argued that the protected license plate looked suspicious. He insisted his fear had been reasonable, even though the patrol video showed Adrian following every instruction. His attorneys challenged the federal search warrant, attacked Nolan's credibility, and argued that the operation had been entrapment. The court rejected those arguments. The government had not ordered Kincaid to break the law. Adrian hadn't encouraged a stop or committed a traffic violation. He had simply driven through the area and allowed Kincaid to make his own choices. When the federal trial eventually began in Atlanta, the courthouse was surrounded by media, residents from Oak Haven, civil rights advocates, and law enforcement officials watching a case that had become a national example. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, Wade Kincaid sat at the defense table in a dark suit. Detention had changed him. The swagger was gone. His face looked tired and drawn, and he kept his hands folded as though still expecting restraints. The prosecution presented the cruiser recording first. The jury watched Adrian pull over safely, lower every window, turn on the interior light, and place his hands on the wheel. They heard him explain the location of his identification. They heard Kincaid invent the lane violation. They watched Adrian step out without resistance and place his hands on the roof. Then they saw Kincaid kick his feet apart, twist his arm, step backward, and fire the taser while Adrian remained facing the car. The courtroom became completely still when Adrian struck the gravel. The video continued. Kincaid could be heard claiming that Adrian had tried to attack him. Nolan's voice followed, weakly agreeing after the fact. The timing made the fabrication clear. Medical experts described the probe wounds, the bruising around Adrian's wrists, and the strain in his shoulder. Digital specialists explained how the department's system had been manipulated to mark recordings as corrupted or unavailable. Former victims testified about similar stops. Their stories followed the same pattern: an invented traffic violation, a demand to search, a claim about the odor of drugs, cash seized, complaints rejected. Nolan took the witness stand and told the complete truth. He described the first time he saw Kincaid search a vehicle without cause. He explained the radio phrases, the abandoned gas station, and the pressure to support false reports. He admitted that he had lied when Kincaid asked whether Adrian attacked him. The prosecutor asked why he had contacted the federal government. "Because I realized that silence was helping him hurt people," Nolan said. "I was afraid of losing my job. Then I understood that keeping the job meant becoming part of what he was doing." He did not ask the jury to view him as a hero. He accepted responsibility for the moments when he failed to intervene. That honesty strengthened his testimony. Chief Whitcomb later entered the courtroom wearing a plain suit. His plea agreement required him to describe the department's financial system under oath. I explained how the hidden ledger worked, how cash seizures supported discretionary spending, and how officers who collected more money received preferred assignments and better evaluations. He identified Kincaid as the officer who most consistently produced seizures. Kincaid watched his former chief testify against him. The protection he had trusted for years disappeared in public. Adrian was among the final witnesses. He entered the courtroom without visible anger and took the oath. His answers were controlled, direct, and supported by the video. The federal prosecutor asked whether he feared for his life when Kincaid ordered him out of the Taurus. Adrian paused before answering. "I understood that the situation could become deadly," he said. "But my greater concern was for the people who had experienced the same conduct without training, legal knowledge, or federal support. I knew I had resources they didn't have." "Why did you decide not to identify yourself immediately as a federal agent?" "Because doing so would have protected me while leaving the pattern untouched," Adrian replied. "I believe the safest and most responsible choice was to comply, preserve the evidence, and allow the officer's conduct to be documented without interference." "Did you encourage Officer Kincaid to violate the law?" "No. I drove lawfully. I spoke calmly. I followed his physical commands. Every unlawful action was his decision." Kincaid's defense attorney considered cross-examination, then declined. The recording and Adrian's measured testimony left little room for an effective attack. The jury returned guilty verdicts on deprivation of rights under color of law, assaulting a federal officer, falsifying records, racketeering, and extortion. Kincaid closed his eyes as each verdict was read. At sentencing, the judge looked down from the bench. "You were given authority to protect the public," the judge said. "You used that authority to intimidate, discriminate, and steal. You treated a badge as permission to decide which citizens deserve dignity. The harm extends far beyond one federal agent, because your conduct weakened trust in every honest officer who tries to serve the community lawfully." The court imposed a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. The gavel came down. Kincaid lowered his head and began to cry as the United States Marshals moved beside him. The room offered no celebration. There was only the sober recognition that consequences had finally reached a man who had denied fairness to so many others. Chief Whitcomb received a shorter federal sentence because of his cooperation, but his career, pension, and public reputation were gone. Other officers connected to the hidden fund faced prosecution or permanent removal from law enforcement. Oak Haven entered a federal consent decree. Its traffic stop practices, property seizure policies, training, supervision, and complaint procedures were rebuilt under outside monitoring. Wrongful convictions were reviewed. Seized money was returned when investigators could identify its rightful owners. None of those actions could restore every lost opportunity or erase every frightening memory. But they acknowledged that the harm was real, and they gave the community a path toward rebuilding trust. Outside the courthouse, Adrian stood on the marble steps beneath the bright Georgia sun. Reporters surrounded the prosecutors, calling out questions about the verdict and the future of Oak Haven. A young man in a carefully tailored dark suit walked toward him. Adrian recognized him immediately. "Nolan," he said with a smile, extending his hand. "Or should I say Special Agent Avery?" Nolan shook it firmly. He had completed the demanding training at the Federal Bureau of Investigation Academy in Quantico. His cooperation, integrity, and willingness to accept responsibility had been carefully evaluated. The Bureau had offered him a chance to begin again, not because his mistakes were forgotten, but because his later choices showed the capacity to become the kind of officer he had once hoped to be. "I'm reporting to the Atlanta field office," Nolan said. "The white-collar crime division." "That's good work," Adrian replied. "I wanted to see the case end," Nolan said. "And I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For taking the risk. For showing me what law enforcement is supposed to look like." Adrian's expression became thoughtful. "The case is ending, but the responsibility doesn't end with it. There are many communities like Oak Haven and many officers who begin believing authority makes them untouchable." He placed one hand on Nolan's shoulder. "Never forget what it felt like to sit in that cruiser and know something was wrong. Remember the weight of remaining silent. Let that memory guide you when speaking up becomes difficult." "I will," Nolan said. He joined several agents near the courthouse entrance, carrying himself with a quieter and more honest confidence than the rookie who had once been afraid of Kincaid. Adrian watched him go. His encrypted phone vibrated inside his jacket. The display showed Deputy Director Preston Vale. Adrian answered. "Whitmore, enjoy the sunlight while you can," Vale said in his familiar gravelly voice. "We received a credible report about a county department in West Texas operating an extortion scheme against migrant families. I need the Civil Rights Unit on the ground as soon as possible." Adrian looked back at the courthouse. Wade Kincaid was headed to prison. Oak Haven's hidden system had been exposed. But justice wasn't a single victory, and abuse did not disappear because one department had been forced to change. "I'm on my way," Adrian replied. He ended the call and walked down the marble steps, blending into the crowd like another man in a dark suit. He had learned long ago that the people who abused authority rarely expected accountability to arrive quietly. The story of Adrian Whitmore is not only about an arrogant officer making a disastrous mistake, it is about the choices that surround power. Kincaid's fall began long before he fired the taser. It began each time he chose prejudice over fairness, control over service, and convenience over truth. It grew whenever a complaint was ignored, a report was altered, or a colleague decided that loyalty mattered more than another person's rights. By the time Adrian drove past the abandoned station, Kincaid no longer believed consequences applied to him. The badge had not created his character. It had simply given his character room to act. Nolan's journey carries a different lesson. How was afraid, and fear led him to support a lie during the traffic stop. That choice mattered. It placed an innocent person in greater danger and made Nolan part of the violation. Yet his story also shows that a serious mistake does not have to become a permanent identity. He told the truth, accepted responsibility, and helped expose a system that was harming people. His later courage did not erase the past, but it changed what he chose to do next. That is often where growth begins. Forgiveness does not mean pretending harm never happened. Accountability does not require hatred. A community can insist on fair consequences while still believing that people are capable of learning, changing, and choosing a more honorable path. Adrian's calm should not be mistaken for passivity. He knew that reacting with anger on the roadside might give Kincaid the excuse he wanted. Instead, Adrian controlled what he could control. He observed, documented, survived, and trusted the truth to carry weight once it reached people willing to act. Real strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is a steady voice during an unfair encounter. Sometimes it is the courage to report a respected colleague. Sometimes it is a supervisor refusing to bury another complaint. Sometimes it is a community continuing to demand honesty after being ignored for years. Most of us will never stand on a dark highway with a taser pointed at our backs. But each of us will face smaller moments when another person's dignity depends on our choice. We may be asked to laugh at an unfair joke, stay quiet when someone is mistreated, support a convenient lie, or protect a friend from consequences they have earned. Those decisions may appear small, yet they shape the culture around us. Kindness is not weakness. Responsibility is not humiliation. Admitting that we were wrong can be the first honest step toward becoming better. Power is safest in the hands of people who remember that every person deserves respect, even when no one important seems to be watching. Oak Haven changed because evidence survived. One young officer finally spoke, and others were willing to follow the truth wherever it led. The process was imperfect and painful, but it showed that systems built on silence can be changed when enough people refuse to keep protecting what is wrong. If Adrian's story stayed with you, share it with someone who believes courage can be calm and justice can be firm without losing its humanity. Support the channel for more dramatic stories about accountability, hidden strength, second chances, and the moment truth finally reaches the light. And leave a thoughtful comment. When doing the right thing could cost you approval, security, or the future you expected, would you still choose to speak?